The war in Ukraine has drained a significant portion of Russia's military resources. We've seen the consequences of this strain, from Yevgeny Prigozhin's short-lived rebellion with the Wagner Group in 2023 to the increasing incursions and offensives by Ukraine in Russian territory. Russia is clearly stretched thin. Meanwhile, China has a historical claim to land that Russia currently controls. On the surface, it might seem like a prime opportunity for China to take advantage of Russia's current vulnerabilities and reclaim these territories. In fact, Taiwan's leadership has even cheekily suggested that China should look towards Russia rather than Taipei. But is an invasion of Russia by China likely? Spoiler alert, probably not, but the reasons are more nuanced than you might think. Speculation about China invading Russia ramped up earlier this year, when reports surfaced about Russia conducting military exercises between 2008 and 2014 that simulated a potential Chinese invasion. However, these reports were overblown. Powerful nations frequently draft contingency plans for all kinds of scenarios, and it wouldn't be surprising to learn that most major powers have similar plans for every possible adversary, including their allies. Moreover, the sino-Russian relationship has never been entirely harmonious. The Sino-Soviet split of the 20th century was a prolonged ideological and geopolitical rivalry between Moscow and Beijing. It wasn't until Xi Jinping's era that the two countries formed the no-limits friendship we see today. These military exercises date back to a time when China wasn't the economic or military giant it is now, and Russia had no significant reason to fear a Chinese invasion. However, fast forward to today, and circumstances have changed. The idea of China exploiting Russia's current state of military and political disarray is gaining traction. Just last week, Taiwan's President William Lai made headlines with a provocative suggestion. Instead of fixating on Taiwan, perhaps China should consider retaking the vast swathes of land it ceded to Russia during its period of weakness in the 19th century. Lai's suggestion wasn't a call for action, but a rhetorical jab meant to point out the absurdity of China's irredentist claims on Taiwan. Historically, China did lose land to Russia, particularly during the 1858 Treaty of Aigun and the 1860 Convention of Peking, which saw the Qing dynasty cede territory that is now part of Russia's Far East, including the port city of Vladivostok. This land was lost during what China refers to as its century of humiliation, and it still views these treaties as unequal. However, the fact remains that China and Russia have coexisted along this border for over a century without military confrontation, and Vladivostok remains one of Russia's most important Pacific naval bases. Lai's broader point was that if China wants to reclaim what it believes is historically its own territory, there are plenty of other regions, like those ceded to Russia, that would be equally valid under Beijing's logic. So why focus so intently on Taiwan? As of now, Russia is struggling to maintain control over its own territory, let alone defend against the world's most populous nation. Ukraine's success in penetrating Russian defenses has shown that Moscow is overextended. Even if Russia wanted to defend its border against a possible Chinese incursion, it lacks the manpower and resources. While Russia's military is tied up in Ukraine, China has over 1 million soldiers, not currently engaged in any conflict. But despite this glaring opportunity, Beijing has shown little interest in challenging Russia militarily. The reasons are more strategic than ideological. A direct military conflict between two nuclear-armed states would have catastrophic global consequences. The balance of power in Eurasia, as well as their cooperation in opposing Western influence, provides both countries with a compelling reason to avoid war. Economic cooperation between Russia and China, particularly in energy and trade, further binds their relationship. To understand why China is unlikely to invade Russia, let's take a historical detour to the early 19th century, specifically to Napoleon Bonaparte's era. In 1803, Napoleon was struggling to finance his ongoing wars across Europe and was gearing up for another conflict with Britain. At the same time, France had acquired a massive territory in North America from Spain, known as Louisiana, modern-day Midwest USA. Napoleon, however, realized that defending this far-flung territory was impossible while his forces were occupied in Europe. So, rather than face inevitable conflict with the growing United States, he opted to sell the territory in what became known as the Louisiana Purchase. The United States, eager to expand, purchased the land for $15 million, a fraction of what it was worth. Napoleon understood that continuing to hold the land would have been costly and unsustainable. Selling it gave him much-needed cash and allowed him to focus his military efforts closer to home. In a similar way, Russia, if pressed hard enough, might be inclined to negotiate away parts of its Far East in exchange for financial support from China. Beijing might not even need to use force to gain strategic advantages. In fact, in June 2023, Moscow agreed to grant China access to the North Pacific via shipping rights in the Tumen River area, an indication of Russia's growing dependence on Chinese goodwill. Should Russia find itself more financially or militarily crippled, it could theoretically sell or lease parts of its sparsely populated Far East to China, thus averting conflict while gaining much-needed resources for its war effort in Ukraine. While a direct Chinese invasion seems unlikely, territorial negotiations that favor Beijing are very much within the realm of possibility. For example, China may eye regions like Outer Manchuria, which was part of the land lost in the 19th century, although it's less likely they would ever acquire Vladivostok due to its importance to Russia's Pacific Fleet. For a full-scale conflict to erupt between China and Russia, there would need to be significant friction beyond just territorial claims. Russia's long-term military and economic viability could become a point of contention, especially if Beijing doubts Moscow's ability to recover from its current struggles. China could also take preventive action if it perceives Russia as a future threat. However, such a war would be immensely costly, not just in terms of military resources, but in the potential collapse of sino-Russian cooperation, which benefits both nations geopolitically and economically. They share a common interest in countering Western influence, and a war would disrupt this partnership. While it's tempting to imagine China seizing the moment to reclaim its historical territories from Russia, the likelihood of a military invasion is low. Instead, any territorial shifts would more likely come through negotiations, possibly involving financial incentives or other diplomatic arrangements. Ultimately, despite Russia's vulnerabilities, both nations stand to lose too much from a direct conflict. For now, China will continue to focus on its long-term strategic goals while maintaining a cautious relationship with its northern neighbor. If you enjoyed this analysis, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth geopolitical content.